get rolling, and so we can end on time. So for those of you who haven't met me, my name's Alexis Valdera. I'm the Coastal Program Manager at AudubonTexas. And what we're gonna do in terms of format, before I introduce Kristin, I just wanna let folks know we're gonna turn off the cameras and mute everybody so Kristin can do a presentation without, interfering with the bandwidth or anything like that. And then after about 20-30 minutes of presentation, we'll bring the group back. We can have a discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to ask questions. And I'll also be monitoring the little chat box. So if you want to just send them in, I can relay those to Kristin during the discussion at the end. So if Jennifer will go ahead, and Jennifer's one of our Audubon team members, and turn off the cameras and get the folks muted, I can let everybody know. Today, our guest speaker is Kristin Vale. It sounds like a lot of y'all already know her, but I'm really excited to have Kristin join us today since, we're talking about beach nesting birds and shorebird conservation in Texas. I think this is a really good time to do that. It's summertime, folks are out at the beach. We get a lot of questions. We had some interest in shorebirds and kind of what the effects on those beach nesting birds are when people are out at the beach. So I thought this would be a really good topic for our first virtual BirdNerd. Thanks to everybody who responded and said they would still want to try to continue the BirdNerd series online. I know this is usually an in-person opportunity to get together and do some new training. So thanks for trying this out for us. As I mentioned, I'm new to Audubon, so this is also my first opportunity to interact with this community and do one of these series. So please don't hold back with your feedback. If you like it, if you don't like it, it's kind of up to y'all what you want to do. If you want to do more of these, we're happy to coordinate them. And so that's kind of an introduction about me. And now I'll hand it over to Kristin. Kristin is a Texas Coastal Program Coordinator at American Bird Conservancy. And I first met her at the Colonial Waterbird meeting last fall or winter, right after I had joined Audubon. And she gave a really great presentation on their work on beach nesting birds. And so when this topic came up, I immediately thought of her and thought everybody might enjoy hearing a little bit about their work and some of the stuff she does with American Bird Conservancy. So we're going to turn over the controls to Kristin and share her presentation, and then we'll go back to having everybody on screen when she's done. So thanks, Kristin, for joining, and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alexis, for the invitation, and thank you all very much for joining today. This is really exciting to see how many people are interested in the work that we are doing. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Hopefully somebody will flag me if you cannot. But
we can see it.
Okay, good. All right, so I will be talking about their beach nesting bird and shorebird conservation work on the Texas coast. And really today, I really want to emphasize the importance of the beach nesting bird habitat on our coastline, on every coastline across the world, because the habitat is continuously shrinking from development and constructions and human disturbances, and so every piece of habitat is so important for the birds. And so I really want to stress that, as well as make the folks aware of these birds that nest on our beaches that did not know that birds nested. And for the folks that do know, a reminder to help us share this message with everyone. Because I grew up in Texas and I did not know that birds nested on our beaches until I was an adult in grad school. So that's just, goes to show, how important it is to share this information. So our Texas Shorebird and Seabird Stewardship Program, the goal is to stabilize and hopefully increase populations of imperiled beach nesting bird species through protection, monitoring, and outreach. These are 3 prongs of our program that we really work around. Protection is literally protecting the nesting bird habitat. Monitoring is where we actually monitor the species to see how they respond to the protections that we provide on the habitat. And then the outreach component is sharing this information with the public, either on site at the beach, or we talk with visitors and make them have positive experiences and show them birds sitting on nest, or we go to outreach events or give presentations like today's. And so thank you very much for letting me share this information. Again, outreach is important. The more people know about beach nesting birds, the better off they are. So this is a partnership program, and it's hugely relies on partnership. We work with Gulf Coast Bird Observatory, Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries Program, Houston Audubon, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we work with these amazing partners to help us conserve beach nesting birds across the whole Texas coast. We just cannot do it alone. And these are 13 sites highlighted that we've worked at from time to time from 2013 through 19. We haven't worked at all these sites all at the same time, different sites at different times based on funding. And but in 2019, I'm pretty sure we did actually survey and monitor these all these 13 sites. So 2019 was a good year. So the target species that we monitor are black skimmers and least terns. Those are our seabird species. And then snowy plovers and Wilson's plovers, those are our shorebird species. We monitor them because they all have low or declining populations. And I'll start with black skimmers. Their populations are on serious decline, over 70% in the last 30 years. So a red flag has been waving for this species for a while now, and they are having some serious trouble. Every nest counts for the species. Least terns, they don't really do very well on our beaches. Their population counts, it's really hard to get a good population estimate. There hasn't really been a good one since the 80s or 90s. For snowy plovers, 71% of the entire Gulf of Mexico birds surveyed are nest in coastal Texas for that species. So Texas is a really important site for nesting snowy plovers, coastal Texas. And then we have Wilson's plovers. Over 31% of the entire US population nests in Texas. And we're just behind Louisiana. I think they support 38% of the nesting population. So our coastline is important for these species. Hence why we aim to protect these species. So talking about the habitat that these birds like, they like wide open spaces. And so a lot of times when people look out of these wide open spaces, they don't think of nesting bird habitat, but this is, they like sand, they like short, sparse vegetation. This is ideal. If you see this big open sandy areas, assume that there's probably a bird nesting in there somewhere in our coastal regions. So I just wanted to paint this picture. This is the kind of habitat that these birds seek and ones that we try to protect. But each coastal area is different as you go along the coast. So on the upper Texas coast, a lot of our beach nesting birds actually nest on the beaches because we have some areas we have wider beaches. Our dunes are really short and then they have sparse vegetation. So we have a lot more of our target species nesting actually on the beachfront because there's available habitat for the birds. As you go a little bit further down the coast, it's a hit and miss. Some of them nest, there's some available beachfront habitat, but in some places they're not, so they'll nest behind the dunes and some salt flats. As you go even further down the coast, the picture on the left is the dunes at Padre Island National Seashore. So you can see they're starting to get a lot more, a lot larger, a lot more established, more vegetation, and that's not as attractive to the birds. So they tend to nest in the salt flats behind the dunes. And so the picture on the right is at Port Aransas Nature Preserve. So those big open, wide open spaces, that is ideal beach nesting bird habitat. And even further down the coast at Boca Chica, the picture on the left is the beachfront. So you can see there's not much dune habitat there. They're much large. So the picture on the right is behind the dunes. It's, again, wide open spaces, big expansive salt flats. So those, as to recap, the upper Texas coast has more beachfront habitat, but as you further down the coast, they're nesting in these salt flats primarily. So I want to go into the nesting ecology about these birds. So the birds start nesting, let's say snowy plovers in central and south Texas, they'll start nesting as early as late February, or I think we even had a nest in late January, depending on the temperature of the winter. Since South Texas is a little bit warmer, some of these birds are actually nesting as early as February. That's pretty rare, but we have some snowy plovers that nest on the upper Texas coast, and they'll start mid-March. So that's a kind of a good starting point. And so the birds will gradually start nesting. And the Wilson's plovers will start next. They start generally April 1st. And then you have least terns that come in mid to late April, or beginning of May. And then black skimmers seem to follow. So the nesting season goes all the way through August. Sometimes, depending on the season, if storm events, they might end sooner or later if there's less storm events. So I'll start with black skimmers with their nesting ecology. Actually, black skimmers generally do not nest on our beaches in Texas. They do elsewhere on the Gulf Coast, but generally in Texas, they prefer colonial islands. But on the rare occasion, they might nest at the Dow Chemical Plant in Freeport, which is the picture on the left. And this is, they nest within the chemical plant. There's a 5-acre plot that's been fenced off that is protected for these black skimmers, and Dow Chemical is very supportive of this nesting colony. Gulf Coast Bird Observatory does the monitoring here and is actually a pretty productive colony when there's not large rain events or big predation events. And this fencing that you can see around this picture, there's electric fencing on the top of it, so it reduces any chances that a mammal might be able to jump over the fence, but it doesn't protect them from avian predators or rain events. But it's a pretty successful colony in general, and this year we've heard that that's actually been a really good year for them. So, and I mentioned that the black skimmers have declined 70%, and this nesting site is pretty much, we all rely on this being successful to help grow the black skimmer numbers. On occasions, when colonies do fail on the islands or potentially at Dow Chemical, then they will go to the beach. Like at East Beach, we had a rare black skimmer nesting there, but they're usually not successful. It's a last resort. So unfortunately. So moving on to least terns. Least terns, they love to just open or nest in the open sand. I mean, if you got a spot in the open sand, the least terns will likely nest in it. And as I progress through these photos through the target species, notice how camouflaged these birds are. They rely on being camouflaged to help protect them when they are nesting in open areas like this. Least terns will lay 2 to 3 eggs. Snowy plovers, they also like the open sand, but they start to like a little bit more vegetation, a little bit of tufts of vegetation around them, and they lay 3 eggs. And then we move on to our Wilson's plovers. You can see here on the left, they like to hide behind a little bit of vegetation. So each species likes a little bit more and more vegetation, and you can see the Wilson's plover is a darker color, so they kind of they like that little bit darker area to camouflage themselves. And they also lay 3 eggs. All right, so this is a picture of the nesting habitat for the bird. So I'm just trying to paint a picture for everyone to show how vulnerable these birds are on our beaches, but also show how well they can camouflage with the environment, how they've evolved to be able to continue to nest on our beach fronts or sand flats, wherever they nest. So this is a picture at Bolivar Flat Shorebird Sanctuary. This was actually taken this April. And somewhere in this picture is a nesting Wilson's plover, and it is right there, right in the middle. So you can see how camouflaged it is, which is beneficial to, protecting them from predators. But as a beachgoer walking on the beach, you can also see how easy it is for someone to actually miss this. Again, we've got a hiding bird in this picture. Bolivar Flat Shorebird Sanctuary. Again, this is the beachfront. And here is a least tern chick that's about 1 to 2 days old. So again, very camouflaged and very vulnerable. And lastly, we've got a picture. This is at Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. Their property extends to the Gulf Beach, just west of High Island. And here you can see the least tern nest. So it looks exactly like a seashell. So very camouflage, very vulnerable. So this leads into why we have habitat protection as why it's necessary to protect these birds. So what we do is literally fence off the habitat when we can. So like on a lot of our beachfront areas that we protect, we literally put signs and fencing around the entire nesting habitat. And we put English and Spanish signs out there. And between each post, we put baler's twine and flagging tape. You can kind of see that on the left photo. And actually, if you look in this left photo, there's a pair of black skimmers nesting on top of this dune. Their colony failed wherever they were nesting, and so they moved to this beach. This is at San Luis Pass County Park. This is on the Brazoria side within the pass. And other protective measures that we put when we cannot actually fence off the habitat is a couple examples of signs on the right. The first one is help keep our beach nesting birds safe. Please walk in the wet sand. A lot of the birds, like the least terns, will nest outside in of their fencing. They really like to nest near the high tide line, which is it's pretty scary for them because there's a lot of high tide events that will wash them away. But they really like to expose themselves, and so to offer better protections for them, we put these signs up encouraging people to walk in the wet sand because you're less likely to accidentally step on eggs or chicks, or you're also less likely to get the birds up off their nest. So the longer the birds are spooked off their nest when humans are around, the more vulnerable their eggs are to predators and to heat. And heat will actually kill the eggs or the chicks. If a bird is off their nest for longer than 10 minutes, say in heat like we have right now, over about 100 degrees, within 10 minutes or a little bit more, it can actually cook the eggs and kill it. So heat is very dangerous for these birds. So we encourage all people when they go to the beach to walk in the wet sand. And then also the bottom sign is watch for flightless chicks, proceed with extreme caution. A lot of the chicks move to the water's edge to feed. They go to the rack line. There's a lot of good food, like especially for the plovers, or the least tern chicks will hang out near the rack line. And the adults will bring them the fish. So we'd like to, this is another protective measure we can help with protecting these birds. And hopefully people will see these and abide by them. And we have seen some amazing success from this. So these are pictures that show you the success. The picture on the left is at East Beach in Galveston. You can actually see the footprints that are outside of the fencing, and there's no footprints inside. And so it has worked. We've worked at East Beach since 2014, and through time, people have gotten used to these signs and protections that we have put up, and more people are respectful, and it's just been a behavior change. And again, the outreach that when we were out there talking with visitors, making them aware, a lot of times you don't see the birds out here. They're very camouflaged, and the point is the birds don't want you to see them. So we sharing that information with the public, helps people understand why they should stay out as well. The top left photo is Wilson's plover chicks inside of the nesting habitat at San Luis Pass County Park. As you can see, people are respectful of the area, and they're quite close to people, but they've learned that people stay out, and so that allows them to feed without any disturbances. And the bottom picture is of 3 least tern chicks just behind the fencing at East Beach. So this protection is it's been really beneficial. It's helpful. It works. And I work in the Galveston region, so a lot of my talk is and pictures are from the Galveston region, but Gulf Coast Bird Observatory does a lot of this work at Bryan Beach and on the Matagorda Peninsula, and they've seen just similar successes as well. So, and this is a new site we've been working at San Luis Pass in Galveston. We put up some signs, but no fencing because vehicles can drive through there. But we put up signs asking people to stay out, and you can see the picture on the left where people frequently drove through the dunes. And on the picture on the right is 1 year later, and the vegetation is actually growing in and starting to close up the area because less people have been driving through there. So habitat protection really does work. The monitoring that we do, as I mentioned, is to see how the birds are responding to our protections. Is we actually banned our birds. We only banned snowy plovers and Wilson's plovers. You can see this Wilson's plover here with its massive beak that they use for eating fiddler crabs. And then we also monitor their nest to see a nest success or failures, learn why they're failing, if it's human related or predator related, try to work with managers to mitigate that. And we also record disturbances to understand some of the disturbances they are facing. Like this picture is of a least tern nest that nearly got run over. So this monitoring is really important to help us with the protection as well. And a little side into some other work that we're hoping to glean from this is our banded birds, like this Wilson's plovers. We want to know where they go in the wintertime when they're not here. They spend the majority of their time in their wintering grounds in Central America, and Wilson's plovers, almost all of them leave the Texas coast for the winter. So we've slowly through the years started to get a few recite information of these birds, and a lot of them have been in Costa Rica, and all of them have been on the Pacific side of Central America. So we want to know where they're going, what habitats they're using in the winter grounds, because it's just as important to protect the winter habitat as their breeding habitat. So I want to go through some of the threats that these birds face. I want to go through the anthropogenic first, or the human threats. And given that the majority of our beaches in Texas, vehicles are allowed, we see a lot of vehicle disturbance. And so you see here as a picture on the left is a least tern nest that was almost run over. And here's Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. It's a very narrow beach. And you see here is a least tern nesting in the middle of the beach, out in the open. You can see this least tern is actually in the middle of vehicle tracks. So this is a pretty common disturbance for these birds and threat. And a lot of the nests that we see at Anahuac fail a lot of time because of vehicles. Humans, pedestrians, this is a common thing. We used to see a lot more in areas that right after we put up the protections for them. So there was a lot of people trespassing. This is a lot more frequent, or this is also, it happens a lot, this areas that we're not able to fence off because of the Open Beaches Act. So humans, you can see how easy it is to miss this. And, you know, I don't suspect people purposely try to harm these birds. So unleashed dogs are big threats. People feeding seagulls, even the seagulls then harm the eggs, but people bring in the seagulls, or excuse me, laughing gulls into the habitat, so that's threats them. And then campers, people camping on the beach. This is a picture from Gulf Coast Bird Observatory out on Matagorda Peninsula at the mouth of the Colorado River, I think. And then this is randomly at Port Aransas Nature Preserve. This helicopter was doing touch and go practices within the nesting bird habitat within the preserve. And so fortunately this was stopped, but you know, again, people don't think, don't realize, they don't see, so they don't know how much of a threat these things are. And this new threat that we have to our coastline is SpaceX down in South Texas at Boca Chica. Their launch site is smack dab in the middle of beautiful, pristine nesting habitat. And this is going to be a larger threat as more launches or test launches are coming. You can see it on this left photo is actually a snowy plover sitting incubating its eggs right next to that launch site. The bottom right photo is actually of a fire that was caught from one of the test launches. I think that it burned over 100 acres, and I think this was near the end of the nesting season. So so this is going to be a large threat for these birds as things progress. And trash is a never-ending threat for these birds. So looking at natural threats, we've got ghost crabs, laughing gulls, as I mentioned, when they're not influenced by people, yellow-crowned night herons, crested caracaras. These birds will literally just walk the dunes looking for food. Great-tailed grackles, these are a more frequent threat as they are attracted to humans, and then they often go looking in the dunes for food, coyotes and feral hogs. And then high tides and rain, this will actually wipe out a lot of birds at the same time. The water actually, the temperature change will soak the eggs, and they're not vital anymore. They'll literally get washed away. So speaking of the rain, increase of rain and high tides, that increase will create increases in vegetation growth. And so through time, the habitat will change. So this is an example at East Beach. In 2014, you had wide open beaches. And then by 2019, it's been really filled in with vegetation. We've had a lot of rain. We had a lot of high tide events in between that time. And the dark areas are either vegetation or algal flats that frequently become flooded. So the vegetation changes through that time. As you can see, from 2014 to 2020, you get a lot more vegetation, and it still supports some birds, but some of the beach, it won't be able to support as many beach nesting birds, but you will have other species that actually benefit from this increase of vegetation, which include willets. They like really dense vegetation. Their nest is in this right photo. You're not going to be able to see it, but it's just to show you how dense vegetation they like. Common nighthawks, they like algal flats because they can camouflage with them. As you can see in the top right photo, their eggs are almost invisible, as well as their chick on the bottom right. Black-necked stilts benefit from this. And these are all photos from East Beach, just to kind of show you the transition of habitat and what other birds are supported. And black-necked stilts, when that's there, they are generally a marsh species, but they do, some of this area has turned to marsh, and so it's supported some nesting birds. Horned larks with the increase of vegetation there, and killdeer. So this supports other birds as well. And from the monitoring that we've done, we've seen that the blue line, on the graph on the blue line, shows you the decline in Wilson's plover breeding pairs at Bolivar Flats, Shorebird Sanctuary, and yet the increase of birds of Wilson's plover breeding pairs at East Beach. And a lot of this is actually birds moving from Bolivar Flats to East Beach. And we know this because the birds are banded, and so we see the movement. So having these two areas protected is really important for this species and other species as well. Looking at, to kind of show you why they transitioned. So this is to show you before and after Hurricane Ike. So this is before Hurricane Ike, and this is 2006. You can see all the dense vegetation, very few sandy areas. Then Hurricane Ike hit in 2008, so this is after the hurricane. So the sand, some sandy areas were opened up. Vegetation was laid up on top of the vegetation, or sand was laid up on top of the vegetation. And through the years, you can see it's the vegetation has regrown through time. So, so this is very indicative of coastal habitats and necessary as well. Looking at Hurricane Harvey, this is on the Central Coast at Port Aransas Nature Preserve near the eye of the hurricane. The top right photo is Port Aransas Nature Preserve before Hurricane Harvey, and then bottom is after. That boardwalk was completely blown away. And then the table shows you it was beneficial for Wilson's plovers. After Hurricane Ike or Harvey hit, we had a lot of the predators were washed away, and so the nest success actually increased after the storm. So there was, of the 13 nests that we monitored, 13 nests hatched out of the 16, when prior only, or their 5-year average is 3 hatching. So snowy plovers had a very similar nest success after Harvey. They benefited from this storm event. So just to recap, storm events can be very harmful for the birds for that year. It can, cause complete wipeouts of all their eggs and chicks, so they have to start all over. But it is beneficial in the long run. As a picture here at Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge from Hurricane Harvey after it. But here on the right is after Tropical Storm Cristobal this year, it actually opened up some nesting habitat. So there is good and bad things to storm events, but in the end, storm events can be very beneficial for these birds. So moving on and wrapping up, we do work with birds in the non-breeding season. We work with piping plovers. They are a federally threatened shorebird species, and 50% of the piping plover population winters in Texas. So our coastline is very important for them. So we have been, again, this is another collaborative project, and we work with land managers to implement conservation plans or habitat management plans for the species. And other species will benefit from this as well. We have red knots and many other shorebird species in the winter. And upcoming, as I mentioned, trash is a really big problem for these birds and sea turtles and such. We have a new grant that we'll be doing future cleanups and outreach events for students and such when the time is appropriate given COVID, but we plan to ramp up a lot more trash cleanups on our coastline to really hopefully have people reduce the trash they leave on our beaches and also just make our beaches safer for the birds. So I'm pretty much up at my time, so I'll take any questions for anybody. My email is here listed for anybody that has any questions. We do have volunteer opportunities for everyone. In the summertime, we do look for stewards to help us protect the nesting birds. This year, our nesting season is pretty much wrapped up. So in the future, we would love volunteer help from folks, and then for future trash cleanups events that we'll be hosting when the time is right. So I'll take any questions, and thank you all again very much for your time. And I guess just to kind of, there's been a lot of questions from people asking if this year birds were impacted more or less from people with the beach closures, with the beaches being closed, do the birds benefit, or do they nest in more vulnerable areas once the beaches were open? And this year we kind of saw, I would say in general, the birds, some birds nested in really vulnerable areas because there was not any people there to discourage them from nesting there. So we did have, I saw a couple of nests that were in very vulnerable areas, but a lot of times they just nest in vulnerable areas in general. So we did not notice a serious impact to the beach closures and the birds. And so that's, I think, good, but I'm pretty sure that's not the case everywhere, just what we know of.
Great, and thank you, Kristin. I was trying to thank you before, but I was on mute, so I just wanted to say great presentation. I loved all the pictures of the nests and the birds and the before and after of restoration, really awesome, so thank you. And we have some chats and questions in the chat. So the first one is about SpaceX, and it says, did the environmental impact assessment for SpaceX launch complex identify the threats to the bird nesting, and does SpaceX have a plan to protect bird nesting? And
go ahead.
Oh, I could weigh in too if you're not sure, because I know we are just actually working on a letter on this with Casey at American Bird Conservancy, so go ahead, but I can fill in if you're not sure.
I'm not entirely sure. I glanced at it real quickly, and I think a lot of their environmental impact statement had to do with federally threatened species or endangered species, which is, and I don't think there was really much consideration for nesting birds, since the birds that nest there are not federally threatened or endangered. So I don't think that was really mentioned. It talked about nesting sea turtles, but I don't think about nesting birds. And so, yeah, so there was another group of conservation folks that just sent a letter to, I forget who it was addressed to, but addressing this issue, that the threats that they are imposing. And so American Bird Conservancy is putting together a letter, and AudubonTexas is signing on potentially to call them out on it or to help bring it to light. So I'm not entirely sure how much of it, if at all, talked about nesting birds, because none of them are threatened or endangered.
Yeah, and I would just add, we are hoping to sign on to that letter. It was to the Federal Aviation Commission or something like that. And the only birds they mentioned were the piping plover and the red knot because their status, and there was some overlap with piping plover critical habitat, but SpaceX within the environmental impact statement was supposed to be monitoring birds and doesn't appear to have been. So that was one of the concerns raised in the letter, and they've been maybe expanding the footprint and didn't do any more environmental compliance. So I think that's one of the issues there as well. And let me see, I got a bunch more questions for you. Oh, one is, do you guys move nests to save them if they're in jeopardy?
No, unfortunately, we can't touch them. And also it causes a big disturbance to the birds, but we never touch them. So we just have to, document the success or failure. And a lot of times when they are in vulnerable areas, a lot of time is documenting the failures, but it's surprising some of the ones that actually nest are successful. That's a good day.
Yeah, it's amazing with all that beach traffic too, that any bird could survive that. You mentioned the Open Beaches Act. Does that prevent you guys from putting signage out in parts of the beach?
Yeah, it limits how far we can put our signage out on the beachfront. So we have to, we basically put it up to the vegetation line or a little bit in front of it. We just have to leave enough space from the high tide line up into our fencing that provides enough area for the public. So like at Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge, that is a very, very narrow stretch of beach. And so there's very little room for vehicles to drive when the tide is high. So we are only allowed to put our signs up to that vegetation line. And so that leaves a lot of space open that we just can't protect. But some of the beaches, like at Bolivar Flat Shorebird Sanctuary, there's a lot more stretch of beach that we can actually protect. And their beaches is wider, and so we can put the signs out in the open stand, but again, leaving enough space from high tide up into our fencing. Okay.
And another question about those nesting birds there. If they lose their nest, will they nest again?
Yes. Yeah. So the goal of these birds is to try to nest as early as possible. And if they do fail, then they'll try again. So a lot of times it's just boom, 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 let's try to get this over with. And there was one snowy plover pair that we documented down in Boca Chica. And last year, I think it was nested 5 times, this one individual, and every single time it failed, unfortunately. But fortunately, this year in 2020, that same bird nested again early in the season, and the first nest hatched. So I'm not sure what happened to the chicks, but I think that was when the shutdown happened. So that was good for them. But yeah, so sometimes they'll nest 2, 3, 5 times. Least terns, once they lose their nest, they are immediately re-nesting. So their goal is to put down as many eggs as they can.
Okay, great. And let's see, I think Jean has a question. Jean, are you able to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Okay.
Yes, okay, great. Go ahead.
The question that I have is, I have a beach house down on West Beach, 7 miles past Jamaica Beach, and I'm seeing more and more this May, lots of least terns. I had never noticed so many of them. And are there more least terns coming out to the San Luis Pass area?
Are you seeing them nesting on the beach, or are you just seeing them flying?
Flying and sitting mostly.
Sitting, okay.
Around, there was lots of them, and they were all the way down to but before that too. But I mean, I counted 40 and 50 of them at different times. I put it on eBird. Okay.
Unfortunately, the ones that do nest at San Luis Pass, it's very few of them, like 10 or less pairs. So there's not an increase in nesting birds. A lot of times when you see groupings like that, it's often they've failed somewhere else, and so they'll move to the beach for a little bit and kind of regroup and then try to find another spot to nest. So they're really not nesting at San Luis Pass. We had one nest there and it was immediately run over by somebody. So yeah, that's pretty much what happened there. But my guess is that it's just kind of regrouping.
Okay, thank you.
I did it again. Do others on the call have questions for Kristin? They feel free to unmute yourself and jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Kristin. This is Sandy. I was wondering, is there a reason that the birds are moving from you said they're seeing movement from Bolivar Flats over to East Beach. Do you know the reason for that?
Mostly because of over vegetation. Through time, it's just been an increase of vegetation. So that open sparse habitat is becoming filled in. A lot of it's also because it was flooded a lot recently through the years. It seemed like Bolivar Flats was getting a lot more flooding events from high tides, and so that again increases the vegetation growth. So a lot of they weren't successful there anymore, so they moved over to East Beach. East Beach is fortunately there's less risk of flooding there in certain areas, so they were just more successful there.
Thank you.
I'm checking the chat. I'm not seeing anybody else jumping in. Do others have questions or other topics they'd like to ask Kristin? I think there's a way to raise your hand, but I don't see hands going up unless you're on your video.
Again, I can't thank you all enough for chiming in. It's really great to see the interest, so I appreciate it all.
And Kristin, I did have one more question for you. So our partners at Audubon Louisiana see a lot of impacts from fireworks over like 4th of July weekend. Do you see that as well in Texas? Like, are the fireworks being shot off in the same place as you have your nesting birds?
Yeah. For my sites, I don't see it as much. One site in particular, San Luis Pass County Park, this is in Brazoria. They shot off like $500 worth of fireworks right next to the nesting black skimmers on the beach, and somehow the black skimmers didn't abandon. That's really rare that they did not abandon. I know in Rockport there's an issue. There's a nesting colony of black skimmers that nest within a park at Rockport, and they shoot off fireworks there, and I think it has an impact on them. I see all the evidence, but I don't really see a decline in birds at my site. So I'm sure, I know it happens elsewhere, but from what I've seen, it's not been a huge threat, even though it's a huge disturbance.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
This is Sue. By July 4th, most of our birds are done. So that's not going to impact them as much as it might some, on the East Coast or something.
Okay. Thanks, Sue. Well, they always say to wait 8 seconds in case anybody wants to jump in. So we'll give it about 8 seconds. Lots of great presentations in the chat. So pass those along to you, Kristin.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of our birds are starting to really wrap up right now. It's when it gets so hot, also the birds slowly start to give up as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's everything. Somebody sent a message saying if you're part of the Galveston Bay Area Master Naturalist and you want to use this as advanced training, put in 0.75 hours. I think that was Ellen. And again, thanks everybody for joining our first virtual BirdNerd. Thank you, Kristin, so much for coming to do this and putting together a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you. And for those who want to join future webinars, please send me ideas if there's topics you want to cover, anything like that. I'm all ears. So thanks again, everybody. And thank you, Jennifer, for being our ace behind the scenes running the webinar. Everybody have a great day. Enjoy your Master Gardener training if you're joining that.